Coming. Took a little while because there were so many testimonies and they come in some of them kind of late. First thing on the agenda, we have bill introductions. Do we have any bill introductions? Not seeing any, we'll move on. We got a staff briefing from the committee from Wind Turbine Lighting Report. Lindsay Archer, you want to give your overview? Are you ready?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am Lindsay Archer from Legislative Research, and as Mr. Chair mentioned, I will give a brief overview of the activities of the Senate Select Committee on Wind Turbine Lighting that occurred on October 27th of 2022 in this very room. It was chaired by Senator Bowers. Let's see here. So it will be blue, if you all have a copy of that. I believe Kate passed it out. So to start off the meeting, myself from KLRD gave an overview of the Kansas Electric Transmission Authority, including its creation, goals, accomplishments, and dissolution. And then another KLRD staff gave a summary of wind energy tax incentives categorized by exemption status and other criteria. Next, the Director of System Planning for the Southwest Power Pool presented virtually, providing information regarding the evolving transmission grid and transmission planning for the future. The director provided and explained a geographic view of SPP as a regional transmission organization, the miles of extra high voltage transmission SPP's annual savings and benefits in SPP's services and generation queue. The director of the Utilities Division for the KCC came next, and he provided information regarding the process for obtaining a public utility designation for developers of renewable generation facilities and the elements of a KCC review. Next, there were discussions of federal funding available for renewable energy products in general. There were representatives from the Kansas Municipal Utilities and the U.S. Department of Energy, who provided information about potential federal funding for those energy projects through sources such as Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the BIL, appropriations, and agreed to work with legislative staff. We actually did meet with the representative from the Department of Energy later to discuss potential federal funding further, as well as with the Department of Transportation. Further information was provided regarding the Kansas Infrastructure Hub, the grant application process, and maximizing funding for Kansas, as well as IIJA funding for new areas, including clean energy and power resilience, legacy pollution cleanup, and electric vehicle charging. Next was an overview of light mitigating technology and Federal Aviation Administration standards. A representative from the American Clean Power Association presented information about federal or FAA requirements for wind turbine lighting. FAA approved light mitigating technology, aircraft detection lighting system, or ADLS, which you will hear more about today, and the vendors who are approved to sell that technology. Additional information was provided on the lights approved by the FAA and the general timeframe for FAA approval of an ADLS system. Next, there were presentations on recent legislation on wind turbine lighting, and a representative from NCSL came to speak as to what some other states were doing in terms of light mitigation. And an assistant revisor of statutes, Nick over there, provided an overview of Kansas legislation regarding wind turbine lighting that was introduced during the 2022 legislative session. We had representatives from other states come to speak as to what their states were doing. Two of those were a commissioner from the North Dakota Public Service Commission, who provided an overview of wind farm projects in North Dakota and the recent rules adopted and law enacted in North Dakota to mitigate wind turbine lighting. The commissioner also provided information about lighting intensity dimming solution, otherwise known as LIDS, as a light mitigating technology not yet approved by the FAA. And a state senator from Colorado provided an overview of the Colorado law enacted in 2022 requiring future wind turbines to be equipped with light mitigating technology. Next, the Deputy Director and General Counsel of the Kansas Association of Counties discussed the role of local government in wind turbine project siting, explained zoned and unzoned counties in Kansas, and described the potential process for wind development for 2 different types of zoned counties. We next had the Executive Director of the Military Aviation and Installation Assurance Siting Clearinghouse with the Department of Defense, who provided an overview of military coordination and readiness involving wind turbine projects. And the Director of Aviation for the Kansas Department of Transportation discussed the importance of the aviation industry in Kansas and provided a pilot's perspective on wind turbine lighting. Next, representatives from 2 companies approved by the FAA to sell ADLS technology, which I mentioned earlier, which is the aircraft detection lighting systems, from DTECT and Terma, provided an overview of that technology, including potential costs to wind developers, technical issues, and related mitigation and FAA compliance. A representative from the Kansas Power Alliance then provided background on the Advanced Power Alliance, described the difference between ADLS and light mitigating technology, provided an overview of the FAA interaction process, described the repower process, and described the issues associated with retrofitting existing towers. That was Kimberly Jenkers-Foddy, and she also provided some additional information on things such as pad siting and some other tax questions that came up earlier in the committee. For conclusions and recommendations, the committee recommended the 2023 legislature explore potential federal funding for the implementation of light mitigation technologies in Kansas and introduce 2 separate bills to address wind turbine light mitigation. One for retrofitting existing wind turbines with technology and another for equipping turbines constructed in the future. And that is all I have for the report, and I can stand for questions.
Questions? Chairman Bowers, I don't know if you had anything to add to what we did, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lindsay did a great job going over this, and it's almost amazing we got all that done in a day. So thank you for all your hard work. The staff was tremendous pulling this all together and giving us facts to start with this year and see where it ends up modifying as we go along. And there are 2 bills. This is what the committee decided, one moving forward, one looking back, to see if there's an answer for both. So that's what I hope we can accomplish in the next couple days here.
Mr. Thompson, or Senator Thompson, would you like to add in, or you?
Oh, we've had a lot of conversations. I mean, we had testimony from a lot of different interests across the state last year. I think that the body of what we've heard is that the interest, this is the new standard for the industry going forward, and that there is an appetite for this. So to the extent we can, I think if we can work this out, I think it'd be good. I think we're going to find there's just a couple little negotiating points that we need to go over, particularly with regard to triggers, and we'll get into that as we work the bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll move on. Thanks, Lindsay. First thing we'll do is, like I said, the packets are coming. They had to print them down. It's going to be a minute or 2, but we're going to go ahead and move forward. We got Senator Peck's got his testimony here. So we're going to go ahead and open the hearing on Senate Bill 49. Nick, you want to give us an overview, and then we'll go to Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, committee, Senate Bill number 49 is the prospective bill moving forward. And what this bill would do would require any wind energy conversion system that's constructed on or after January 1st of 2023 to be constructed with a light mitigating technology system. And this is subject to that system being approved by the FAA. If the FAA approves of that light mitigating technology system, this bill would require the installation of that system on approved turbines, the turbines that the FAA approves that system on, within 24 months following that FAA approval. The bill would authorize the Kansas Department of Transportation Aviation Division to grant a waiver or an extension of time to the statutory 24-month requirement if that wind energy developer shows that there's supply chain or market constraints that will delay the installation of that light mitigating technology system. The bill would apply, and both bills that you're going to hear would apply to any wind energy conversion systems that have 5 or more wind turbines that are 50 feet or taller in height. And under these bills, a light mitigating technology system could include any aircraft detection lighting system or any other comparable system that is capable of reducing the impact of that lighting. And Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Okay, questions? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Nick. One concern that I'd had, and I had a conversation with the ks.gov aviation people, and that is that they don't really have an appetite for dealing with this. I think if they were forced to, they would, and therefore the fiscal note shows they're adding 5 FTEs to do this. Would there be another department that you could think of that might be more appropriate if we decide to move it to some other oversight authority?
Well, I think, I see what you're saying, but I think that's probably a policy decision for you all to make, especially based on, I assume, the testimony that you're going to hear in a little bit.
I think what we'd do is we'll have the hearing and then maybe take a sidebar and try to figure that one out because, yeah, it sounds like to me they don't want to have it and we'll find a place for it.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Nick, I see that this bill talks about on and after January 1st, 2023, but it only becomes effective upon publication in the statute book. I'm sure we have some idea of how many wind conversion systems are under construction, but what happens if one of them commences operations May 31st?
Yes, there is a little retroactivity built into this with the publication date being July 1st, if this were to take effect. So I think that's a good question.
I think we're going to have some amendments to probably clean up the dates.
The law would say that the system cannot commence commercial operations in the state if it hasn't met the requirements of the bill. So.
Thank you, and I appreciate that there will be some amendments. My concern was just that they might have already commenced before it goes into effect. So we'll look at that when we work the bill.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Okay, we're going to go ahead and start with Senator Peck. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members, for the opportunity to appear before you today to provide testimony in support of both Senate Bill 49 and 46. I realize we're on 49 right now, but I thought I'd just throw that in, Mr. Chairman, and that way, when you get to 46, you can say ditto on my behalf or designate maybe Senator Pittman, but.
Sure. I think he would love to do that for you.
Thank you. This is an issue that is really large to Senate District 15. By the way, just briefly, in case anyone does not have clear understanding what the legislation would do, currently wind turbines have a bright red light on top of them that blink on and off constantly. This would mean they were off unless the radar system detected aircraft or something in the area, then they would blink so the aircraft would know not to fly in that particular area. And I personally, maybe I'm prejudiced, but I personally don't see why anyone would be in opposition to this. Yes, there might be some cost, or there would be some cost potentially to the wind developers, the wind farms that are currently in existence, or those going forward. In Senate District 15, which is southeast Kansas, and then there are others in other parts of the state. I know that Senator Fagg's district has several wind farms. But this is something that really disturbs and distresses them. So I'm here standing up for my constituents today. And I say that because I personally do not live where I can see wind energy. However, with these wind turbines being so tall, pardon me, they can be seen for miles away. If you've done any traveling at night, no doubt you have seen, pardon me, no doubt you, just getting choked up on this legislation. No doubt you have seen.
Water if you want, so.
Seen the, I'm fine, I think, seen the blinking lights from a distance. And residents who live close to these blinking nonstop lights after dark tell me that they disrupt their lives, disrupt their sleep. There are studies, I'm not going to confirm these, but there are studies that say they do all kinds of things. I'm not going to say they do or don't, but I do know that they disturb rest. And for some people, they do that constant blinking causes headaches and other such issues for humans and for animals. Those of us who live in rural areas, I know I do. I love to go outside at night on a clear night and see all the splendor of the heavens that God's created with all the stars, the moons, with blinking lights. You cannot do that. And it's strictly because you happen to live where someone, after you've been living there for maybe who knows how many years, has decided that they're going to put a wind farm there with these blinking lights. So by having them where they were off, except when there is an aircraft in the area, it would provide a lot of relief for individuals. And so that would be one thing that I have heard from several constituents is the disruption of sleep, the headaches, the problems with some animals being restful or unrestful, and the fact that you just can't enjoy a natural night outside if you do have a function with individuals and you're outside enjoying a winter roast or some other type of a function with individuals in the evening time. So I would like to see the committee figure out how to get this legislation passed. I did, Mr. Chairman, have a comment regarding the 24-month period. That seems rather excessive to me. I understand some time frame, but 24 months is 2 years. So I would suggest to the committee, I'm not on the committee, I will leave it to the wisdom of the committee, that you shorten that time frame down. And you will notice that since we're talking about Senate Bill 46, it says that the Department of Transportation Aviation Division shall grant a waiver. Shall means they don't have any choice. If this wind energy, these wind farms, these wind developers say, hey, I've got an issue with getting supplies or this issue, that issue, they have no choice according to this legislation, but they have to grant them a waiver of an extension of time to the 24-month period. The legislation doesn't specify how long that extension of time may be, so that might be additional things for the committee to consider, that if you're going to use the word shall, maybe say shall 6 months, or I prefer the word may, up to a certain amount of time. But again, I just thought I would point that out for the benefit of the committee. Again, I ask for you to look favorably on Senate Bill 49 and 46. Get the language right, pass them out of this committee, and then let the process continue along. Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to stand for questions at the time that you assign.
We have any questions for Senator Peck? Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for the opportunity to appear before you.
Kimberly Swati.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be before you all this afternoon to testify in support of Senate Bill 49 on behalf of the Kansas Advanced Power Alliance. You all know a little bit about who we are, but just as a reminder, we are about 40-plus members of our organization. We represent a diverse cross-section of the nation's leading renewable energy, clean energy developers, owners, operators, and purchasers. And we have about $15 billion of assets invested in the state, created about 20,000 direct and indirect jobs. We are very proud to get to stand before you today in support of Senate Bill 49. We committed to you all into this committee last year that we would, in fact, introduce a piece of legislation related to light mitigation technologies and work to pass a good bill related to that technology. As we heard about in our special select committee, we talked about how this process is really being driven by the FAA and that they are the federal agency with the ultimate authority over the safety of the airspace. They make all of the lighting decisions and determinations through a whole variety of factors. That is not necessarily within our purview. We make the application before to FAA, and then they make the decision. So we have 2 new projects that are operating or that are in construction right now in the state of Kansas, and they have both made application to the FAA for light mitigation technology. So to Senator Thompson's point, this is the way that the industry is heading. The technology just didn't exist to do light mitigation technology for a long time. It's now beginning to exist. There are really 1 or 2 vendors in this space, so that is a bit of a challenge. That is part of the reason why you will see in Senate Bill 49, there is a request for 24-month period after the FAA approves any sort of light mitigation technology. We've asked for 24 months because of the fact that this is the way the industry is moving. When you only have 1 or 2 vendors in the United States that are operating in this space, and given what we've seen related to market constraints and supply chain challenges, we need to be mindful of the fact that there could be a bit of a backlog. And we can't do anything to penalize the projects that are in fact operating and producing power and that have long-term contracts. We can't hold that up while we wait for the technology component parts. But that we would work with KDOT, of course, to file a notice, and this is one of the points that we'll talk about, possibly changing what we file with KDOT rather than a waiver process that we're filing notice. I think that could also help mitigate some of the full-time employees. But that is the reason why we sought that 24 months, was just to really deal with the supply chain. One other point, and I think that this was probably just a little bit of an oversight in drafting, was the effective date of the bill. I believe the effective date of the bill was always supposed to read July 1, 2023, rather than January 1 of 2023. So it would take effect on July 1 as opposed to, even having that 5-month look back. So I do think that that's an important change. We did talk a little bit about the waiver, and we do think that changing the waiver process with KDOT to a notice with KDOT, I do think that would hopefully maybe help allay some of the concerns that KDOT may have, but also continue to make sure that there is a state agency that deals directly with the FAA that would have some sort of oversight related to any sort of, where we are in our process. Lastly, I think that, and hopefully the committee finds this to be the case, whenever there has been a significant issue as it relates to clean energy development in the state, the industry has come to the table. And we've come to the table in good faith to try and work with policymakers, legislators, county commissioners, the governor's office, to create good public policy that in fact is mutually beneficial for the state while allowing the industry to develop successfully and bring $49 million in annual revenue to landowners across the state. So whether it was in 2005 when we created the initial, what we called Flint Hills Box, that created a series of counties in the center portion of the state, which happened to be at that point in time the most wind-rich portion of the state, plus it had access to transmission. And all of those counties, all of those projects that were in existence were literally wiped off the map by that executive order. And we adhered to that. We abandoned those projects. We didn't move forward developing that area. When that map was expanded, it was doubled in size just 6 years later. So now you have all or a portion of 18 counties in Kansas where you have the most robust transmission in place and you have really great wind. We adhered to that box too. We participated in those conversations and we have adhered to that. So both of those policies have been in place since 2005 and 2011. And then in 2015, when there was discussions about the renewable portfolio standard and property tax exemption, we moved forward in good faith with the legislature, and despite not asking for a renewable portfolio standard to be included in the 2008-2009 comprehensive energy bill. We didn't ask for the RPS, but an RPS was put in place because the policymakers at that time believed in what the RPS stood for. We then agreed to move that renewable portfolio standard to something that was voluntary rather than a state mandate. We also agreed to move the life of the property tax exemption from a 10-year or to a 10-year exemption. So we hope that this is just another example of how the industry is committed to working with policymakers at all different levels of state, federal, and county government to make sure that we are, in fact, the good partners that we try to be. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, do we have questions? Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Kimberly. So I would like to talk a little more about this 24-month requirement, particularly because as I read this, it has to be installed within 24 months after receipt of approval. What if the turbines aren't up yet?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. That is a great question, if the turbines aren't up within that 24-month timeframe. When in the process of applying, so you make an initial application, and Alan Claus Anderson is here with me. He can affirm this. But when you make an application with the FAA, you make your initial application for what we call turbine placement and micrositing. And so they determine where every single turbine can or cannot be located, and adjustments are made. And then you make another filing later on that would be for light mitigation technology. And that is when the project is much further on down the road. So it is feasible that there could be some reason that a project wasn't completed within 24 months, but more than likely, once you were making that application with the FAA for light mitigation technology, you would be far enough down the path that you would be moving into construction very soon and able to construct. Construction itself is not a very long process. I mean, it's many, many, many months, but unless if there's severe weather, shortages, crane issues. Otherwise, we should be okay in that period. But is that a fair statement?
Yeah, you can have follow-up. Go ahead.
So I was just wondering, is there a reason that those two are handled separately?
Yeah, so there is an initial application. It's a determination of no hazard for all the turbines, and that will be just initial verification that the area is suitable. It could be for aircraft and military aircraft. So that's the initial, and as Kimberly mentioned, that happens early on in the process, and it'll be for more turbines than ever would be part of a project. So you kind of see that, and people will notice that. The final application to bring in for the ADLS is when we have the final layout. So it's at the end of the process. And some of the reason kind of for the 2 years, and yours is actually a good point, there is, I guess, a conceivable situation where you could have a disruption, which would be a challenge. But generally, then we have to get the county approval. We have to know where everything has been permitted to go to the FAA for the final ADLS approval, because it'll be for the specific final layout. So the first application is for the turbines in general, and then this will be for the specific array. So that comes at the later part. So we should be good as far as a time frame at that point.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Kimberly, for your presentation.
Thank you.
As I was reading this, it talks about commercial operations cannot commence. The thing that I was questioning, do we have any projects in Kansas now that's underway that would kind of slip into this?
So
And if so, how would we react to them? That's my thought.
No, and thank you for that question. There are 2 wind farms that are already under construction, and both have made application with the FAA for light mitigation technology. So they are moving ahead absent any sort of state mandate for such technology. And at this point going forward, everyone else would fall under the new law.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Talking about the light mitigation technology, you said there are maybe 1 or 2 vendors now. What does the mitigation look like? Right now, we see blinking red lights at certain intervals, just for educating the public about what's available now and what the mitigation might actually look like once this is put into place, if it becomes law.
So actually, kind of then don't actually see it as much, honestly, in the sense that, and we actually have a great presentation from the 2 vendors that were part of the Senate Select Committee, and they did a wonderful job of going through their systems themselves. But ultimately, what it is basically just a large radar system. So you have data, essentially you have kind of like a one main I guess, system on top of one of the towers, and that it can then, I guess, cast a wide net, a radar, if you will, that can help, I guess, detect things in the airspace. And so within a specific radius of the actual wind farm, I'm trying not to speak on behalf of the technology of these individuals, so I apologize for kind of fumbling there a little bit. So as something would come close to the airspace, the lights then would come on. And they are required to blink every 3 seconds in synchronization per the FAA guidelines. So then if there wasn't anything being detected in the airspace, then they would be dark.
May I have just a
Go ahead.
follow-up? And so that the core of the radar communicates with the other turbines within the radar and kind of alerts if there's an FAA regulated vehicle in the airspace, and so.
Generally speaking, yes.
Well, I'm glad to see that we have so many proponents who have come together on this issue, and appreciate all the work that has been done, and on the Senate Select Committee on wind turbine lighting as well. So it was a big issue, and glad to see this is the outcome. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, further questions? Senator Thompson. I'll let you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have a conversation with both DTECT and TERMA within the last week and the questions I asked were, is there a backlog right now? They said no. They're in fact expanding fairly quickly, and I asked mostly about the timeline for the installation. They do a lot of their planning during the winter months, and then they do a lot of the installation once the weather gets warmer, in the spring and the summer. So for them, it's about a 9-month time period for the installation of the lighting on the turbines. And because Kansas is pretty flat, it's very, adaptable. It's not like we have a lot of hills where the radars, and they are upgrading to S-band radars, which also takes out a lot of the issues with birds. And there also is an optimization period that takes some time. It can take a year or so to optimize the off time so that when they initially install these, they might be on more than they will be as time goes on and they optimize that. I think that kind of covers, but the concerns, I think, with regard to them being able to keep up, they allayed my concerns about that because they said they have the equipment, they have the crews to be able to keep up with. Is that what you understand?
I'm not going to speak for them, of course. I believe that the system optimization that you described is accurate and what we've experienced. I think the challenge becomes as more states implement light mitigation technology, both going forward and then in a couple of cases looking backward, that there may be challenges there, just as, again, more states implement it. So we're not looking, right now, you all as policymakers are looking just at Kansas, but we as industry are looking at the supply chain available to us nationwide. So just something that we're very mindful of. And if we've learned, there have been a lot of lessons learned in the last 2 years, and the volatility and challenges related to supply chain are very real. And so it's something that we give a lot more, not that we didn't give a lot of credence to before, but it's something that we are much more mindful of now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and perhaps this should have also been for the reviser, but do you have a definition for us for market constraints? I understand supply chain issues, but could just cost be a market constraint? This is on
You're
line
asking
24.
Nick, or you're asking?
I'm asking Kimberly because I think she helped write it.
Okay.
It's on line 24, page 1.
If just costs, so I don't believe that there is a definition of market constraints in this bill, and Nick can probably confirm that or not. And knowing that supply chain was really the key, and that would be a driver of market constraint.
I appreciate that. And my other question is regarding this extension of time. Since it's not defined, I don't think you want the division to just grant a waiver for 1 day. So it might be good to be more specific about that time that's needed, or if there is a timeframe that the adjoining neighbors could count on in terms of how long that could go on. So just my comments at this point.
They could
And I
leave
think-
it for so long. Is that
Right.
what you're thinking? 90 days, 180 days, or?
6 months or-
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we were contemplating as we were reviewing this and being mindful of KDOT and not wanting to grow state government, if you will, necessarily, is that, what if we were providing notice to the Kansas Department of Transportation that a delay, could occur due to supply chain or market constraints. So it's moving from a waiver process to providing notice. Just something to think about and keeping in mind KDOT's thoughts.
Further questions? Not seeing any. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to Aaron, Kansas Livestock Association. I'm not going to get it, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Aaron Popelka with the Kansas Livestock Association. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. KLA stands in support of Senate Bill 49. Just a little background on our membership. We represent livestock owners across the state, have significant land holdings in rural areas and are significantly impacted by the lights on these wind towers. A couple years ago, we did some policy review and adopted a new policy provided in your testimony. And essentially this, we support the ability of landowners to enter into wind leases, but at the same time, we recognize that when you have a tower like these on properties, there are certain externalities, one of which we're talking about today are the blinking lights. And so we want some protections from the legislature for the property rights of individuals who don't or haven't had the opportunity to enter into these leases. Initially, that discussion was around setbacks, but in lieu of setbacks, we think that this light mitigation technology is absolutely necessary. The one thing I think we would suggest maybe in the legislation is it includes not only the ADLS technology that's been talked about, but the light intensity dimming solution technology. My cursory research didn't show that that's actually been approved yet by FAA, and I would submit for our members, it's not just the intensity, which certainly is an issue, but also the fact that it is blinking. We think ADLS gets at that in a much better way for folks in rural areas. I think it was mentioned by ledge staff, but I also provided some citation to North Dakota's law, just for your information, although it may be in your packet. And then as well, if you want to look at, I know previous proponents mentioned the contracts already in place. One is NextEra in Republic County. I provided a citation of that. And I think one of the reasons this bill is necessary, because if you really read the fine print, it's not that they have to do it, it's that they have to apply. And I think that one's probably on the way to getting approved if it hasn't been already. But we need the legislature to step in and make sure that these developments are in places where FAA can get them approved and that the wind companies move through and get them approved. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Do you have any questions? Not seeing any. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Fisher?
Hang up there a little. Chairman Olson, members of the Senate Utilities Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and more importantly, for your service to the state of Kansas. Some of you in your 19th session, I understand. Your time is valuable, so I'll be brief. My name's David Fisher. I'm from Centerville, Kansas. I'm a retired business owner, and I am tired of seeing the blinking lights. I want to protect my family from having to live with these. In our beautiful state of Kansas, there's 3,500 red lights on top of wind turbines blinking needlessly, illuminating our dark sky. And we've heard about the solution. A lot of what I was going to talk about today has already been covered. But I just want to emphasize that this is a viable technology. Kimberly explained how it works. Maybe a simpler explanation is if you take a wind development or wind farm, put a cake pan over it, Generally, it's about 3 miles from the border of the wind farm and 1,000 feet tall. Anything that flies within that, the lights are going to turn on. Anything that doesn't fly within that, the lights will stay off. So if you have a Southwest flight going over Kansas at 38,000 feet that flies directly over a wind development, that won't turn the lights on. So there's not very many aircraft at night. I am a pilot and former flight instructor, flying below 1,000 feet. So these lights are going to be off most of the time. DTECT, one of the leaders in this that were mentioned earlier, they've got 61 of these units installed and operating. They did a study, and keep in mind the study is based on units that are close to airports and units that are also rural. But they determined that 97% of the time the lights are out. I think in Kansas it'd be more than 98%. These systems are in Canada, and Germany, and the United States. DTECT has, as I said, 61 installed. They have another 27 firm orders, including 2 in Kansas. And they have proposals out that cover more than 18 states. On the FAA, one thing that's important to understand is the systems are FAA approved, but it's not like you just go buy the system and plug it in and you've got an FAA approved system. Each wind development has to work, as mentioned earlier, with the FAA and to approve their specific development. So because of that, these things work and they're safe. Cost hasn't come up today, but it's not prohibitive. The notes in my testimony there show on a typical wind development, it's only 0.5% So wind turbines today cost up to $5 million a piece. These systems are around $1.2 million for the entire development. So when you spread that out over 50 or 100 windmills, it's reasonable. So I just ask you to support this bill and protect the night sky for future generations of Kansas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Questions? Not seeing any. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Shirley Estrada? She not here. Jackie Augusta? Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, thank you for hearing my testimony today. I'm Dr. Jackie Augustine. I have a PhD in biology from Kansas State, and I am representing Audubon of Kansas. It's a nonprofit environmental organization with 3,000 members and followers throughout the state. I'm here today speaking on behalf of wildlife. Both birds and bats can be attracted to wind energy facilities. And part of the reason they're attracted, there's some species that are attracted to red lights. And so being attracted to the red lights then causes mortality or at least avoidance behavior for those animals. Blinking lights is better, but they also have some evidence that, no lights is even better. And so that's all I wanted to say today is that this, we are proponents of this legislation because no lights is better than blinking lights, and blinking lights is better than solid red lights. Thank you. And I do have a letter I'll just hand out here.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Not seeing any. I believe that's all the proponents that are oral. I think everybody else is written. Is that correct? Okay. Are there any neutrals? Are there any opponents? Oh, yeah, come on up.
Yeah, this is KDEC. This is what I was trying to say.
I guess you're neutral on, are you on both bills or?
Yes.
Okay. Joe Kelly.
So, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for obliging me to come and talk to you today. My name is Joel Skelly. I'm with Kansas Department of Transportation, and we are indeed neutral. We don't really take a stand on any of the operational aspect of this, short of we don't believe that we are the right agency necessarily to administer that oversight on the waiver issues. We really do not engage otherwise with any of the industry stakeholders that are involved in this bill and do not necessarily have any authority granted to us or given to us by the FAA, which oversees all of the airspace flight safety. So really, I think it's going to change how we would try to do operations. We don't currently have the staffing to be able to do that. As you'll see in the fiscal note, there is actually some changes that we would need to make by hiring some other people to be able to do this, training them, monitoring those situations, reviewing and then granting waivers. So again, I'll keep it short because I know you guys are short on time, but that's kind of the gist of where we're at with this. And we're happy to work with folks on the bill if there are revisions to be made.
Okay, we'll work on that. Do we have questions? Senator Thompson?
Yeah.
Let's do it quick because we're.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. Do you have any suggestions? If not you, who, I guess, is my question.
It's a great question, and I'm not exactly sure that I've got a good subject matter expertise to offer somebody else up necessarily. I would imagine there's some other agencies within the state that actually work with a lot of this industry in some way, shape, or form through the wind energy or the energy group. I'm also not really a good one about wanting to throw somebody out there under the.
I think we can find someone. Is there any further questions? Senator Peterson?
We were mentioning they were talking about possibly just having you be a repository of a notice. Would your mapping be able to handle that?
So I can't speak to that directly, but I'd be willing to definitely consider that and talk with our folks to see what would all be entailed with it, as you mentioned, mapping. We do have mapping throughout the state for roadways and that, but we don't necessarily map other things necessarily like wind tower installations. So it could be another layer, but I don't know if there's another agency that already does that, and I'd hate to be redundant in that regard.
Maybe you have some nice mapping on UAS areas and the supersonic trips, so I believe you do have mapping of airspace.
And we do tied to the UAS essentially, yes. And we rely on FAA for the airspace mapping primarily.
Further questions? Not seeing any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joel. Are there any further neutrals, opponents? Not seeing any. We'll close the hearing on that bill, on Senate Bill 49. I think is there anybody here on 46 that's out of town that want to speak? If not, I think we'll just hold that bill on 46 until tomorrow, regroup, and we'll hear that bill tomorrow. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.